telecom and cable specialist regular.
9, 8, 7, 6. We have main engine start. 4, 3, 2, 1, and liftoff. Liftoff from the 25th Space Shuttle mission, and it has cleared the tower.
Engine throttling up, 3 engines now at 104%.
Challenger, go with throttle up.
Roger, go with throttle up. Flight final. Good. RSO reports vehicle exploded. You see everybody stay off the telephones. Make sure you maintain all your data. Start pulling it together.
Today is a day for mourning and remembering. Nancy and I are pained to the core of the tragedy of the Shuttle Challenge. We know we share this pain with all the people of our country. This is truly a national loss. The Challenger 7 were aware of the dangers, overcame them, and did their jobs ready. They had a hunger to explore the universe and discover its truths. They wished to serve, and they did. They served all of us. We will never forget them, nor the last time we saw them as they prepared for their journey and waved goodbye.
And boom! It's all predicted by the engineers of Morton Tycho. 7 astronauts were killed on board, and you might want to ask, who is Morton Tycho? And why no one stopped this from happening if it was all predicted already? Well, my name is Huang Sheng, and today I will be answering these questions as well as introducing to all of you about the Challenger disaster. As for my teammates, Andrew, Sun Hang and Ren Shen, they will be discussing further into this case study about what happened, the case analysis, as well as the solutions. Meanwhile, for Mr. Wei Kang over here, he will be concluding about this case study for all of us. As starter, what is the Challenger Space Shuttle program? Well, it was said to have the main objective to carry a probe into the space in order to examine the Halley's Comet. But a huge program like this certainly have other hidden objectives as well. For example, NASA. NASA wanted to secure the government's budget by utilizing this overly budgeted program. And on the other hand, the USA government itself. President Reagan planned to mention about the teacher in the space program in order to inspire the children and to regain public interest on this overly budgeted program. Now let's take a moment off and look at this beautiful woman over here. She's teacher McAuliffe, and she was the chosen one among hundreds and 10,000s of other teachers. She was proud and excited, not knowing that she's going to be on board on the shuttle to the heaven. Next up, let's talk about Morton Tycho as mentioned earlier. They are the designer of the solid rocket booster for Challenger. As you can see here, this is the solid rocket booster segmented into many sections, and each section was sealed by 2 rubber O-rings. Yes, rubber O-rings, just like the one we use in our hose, water hose, just larger. And on the day of launching itself, the weather was freezingly cold, and the rubber O-rings couldn't withstand the temperature, which subsequently failed, leading to the disaster. Of course, the engineers of Morton Tycho had long predicted about this. Up until now, some of you might be wondering, how are all of this related to us at all? Or even this ProfCon presentation itself? Well, as a future engineer, all of us might encounter a situation in the future like this. Sorry, can you help me to read this statement out? And what's your name? Now, Mr. Zheng Fang will be the engineer and I will be the manager.
Manager, we should stop the project. It's too dangerous.
Stop the project? Ah, Mr. Zheng Bang, let me tell you something deep. Silence is gold. So shut up and just do it! Aha! This is a workplace conflict, right? The engineers in Modern Taekwondo have faced a similar situation like this, particularly this man, Roger Boiserly. He failed. He wanted to stop the shuttle from launching, but he failed to resolve the workplace conflict with his managers. The NASA and Modern Taekwondo managers had a different belief, and they wanted to launch. So they competed by using their power and led to this disaster. Next up, if you'd like to know more about how this workplace conflict came about in detail, I would like to pass on to my teammate Andrew to further elaborate on it. Thank you. And thank you, Zheng Bang.
Thank you, Hang Sheng. Good afternoon. My name is Sujian, and I'll be talking to you about what really happened between Taekwondo and NASA. So, 6 months before the launch, Mr. Robert Boiserly, he's one of the engineers who worked on the solid rocket booster program for the space shuttle. He warned Mr. R.K. Lan, who is the Vice President of Engineering of Modern Taekwondo, he warned him about the O-ring failures experienced from previous shuttle launches because it was a persistent problem. So this shows that Modern Taekwondo management were aware of this issue, and the team of engineers who worked on this project wanted to investigate further, but there was no direction from the management because they think that this is just a small issue. So there was nothing that the engineers could do about this until the night before the launch. Let's take a look at what happened. So there was a conference call between the Taekwondo engineers and the NASA managers, where the engineers took this opportunity to voice their concerns regarding the possible O-ring failure. And the person who led all this explanation was none other than Robert Boiserly. His main concern was for the safety of all the crew members. He knew that the O-rings will fail because temperatures were dropping dangerously low, and the consequences will be disastrous if the O-rings fail during launch. This is when Mr. Lawrence Malloy, he's one of the NASA managers, obviously very frustrated with Boiserly's recommendations, he said, "When do you want me to launch? Next April?" This has put Mr. Lan, who was also part of the conference call, in a dilemma, whether or not he should override Boiserly's advice. Because this space shuttle launch has been postponed several times, and there was increasing pressure and frustration from NASA. But at the same time, as an engineer, he knows that safety comes first. Until his colleague, Mr. Gerald Mason, who is the Vice President of Management of Modern Taekwondo, he famously said, "Take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat." Mr. Lan then took some time off to think about it, and subsequently, he gave the green lights for launch. Now that we know what the engineers were concerned about, let's take a look at what are the NASA managers' concerns. So one of their concerns are the organizational, political, and economical factor. All of the engineering decisions and management decisions that they made were to accommodate these factors in order to gain more funding. They made a promise to the American government and the people that they will make space travel routine and affordable to secure more grants. To increase the popularity, they sold this space program to the industry as a tool to open up new commercial opportunity. They also sold it to the military with the means of increasing national security. And all of the scientists in America talks about this space program as an American voyage that will have many great scientific gains. And to increase the popularity further, they also sold it as a partnership with the European Space Agency, with the reason that they want to increase national and social relations between the Europeans and the Americans. So based on all this concern, it is clear that at that time, the NASA managers were facing a lot of pressure not just from the political community, but also the industrial, the military, the scientific, and the international community. Now, to investigate further into the mode of conflict management used by the engineers and the NASA managers, I will now pass on my time to my teammate Soon Hang to talk to you more about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Soon Hang. I will be presenting the conflict part of our case study. So first, let me do a brief explanation on what conflict is. Conflict is arisen due to the struggle or contest between people with opposing needs, values, beliefs, experiences, or goals that lead to opposing views. As for our context, conflict was triggered between NASA management and modern telco engineers. As mentioned earlier by Andrew, NASA's prior concern was the operational stage, which means that they merely emphasized on setting the space shuttle to launch. Besides, no order of delay was allowed by NASA since loss of public trust will eventually causes NASA to lose their commercial contract nationally and internationally. However, NASA's interests greatly defeat modern telco engineers' concern of developmental stage. To the engineer, the safety must be tightly held, since a tiny deceptive act could result to a devastating catastrophe. Even though their responsibility to set the space shuttle to launch might seem as easy as a click of button, yet it was irreversibly impactful. All these differences in interest would then resolve to different conflict responses. There were basically two different stages of response based on the analysis done before the day of launching. As you can see from this table, NASA became more aggressive in the conflict, whereas modern telco engineers lost their aggressiveness. Well, at the very first stage, NASA chose to collaborate by kindly requested a justification for the no-launch recommendation. At the same time, based on the analysis, based on the data given by the engineers, they also did their own data analysis as well. Whereas for modern telco engineers, at first, they tried to compete by sending out a help memo to exert their feeling of dangerous. In response to the request of justification for NASA, they also provided their analysis to convey their own opinion. Well, in the second stage, right after the meeting through the call conference, NASA was dissatisfied with the unclear explanation from the telco engineers. Besides, due to the previous 24 cases of successful launching, a state of complacency had grown in the workplace. This caused NASA to tended to compete for what they believed and doubted what had been given by telco engineers. At the same time, pressure from various organizations forced NASA to act more aggressively. Well, for modern telco engineers, in the second stage, they tended to accommodate due to their less convincing data. Besides, the power distance in the workplace indirectly created pressure to the engineers as well. Lastly, the most important thing is the culture of groupthink arose due to the constraints of providing personal opinion and creativity. All these factors eventually contributed to the loss of self-principle of modern telco engineers. So, based on this case study, we believe that both parties involved were actually having a same goal, which is setting the space shuttle to launch successfully. However, conflict causes them to diverge on the path of success. Hence, we strongly believe that there were much more improvements which were done to prevent this disaster. So next, I would like to invite Winston to further talk about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Soon Hang. My name is Ren Shen, and I will be talking about what could have been done to prevent this disaster. For my presentation, I will categorize it into two parts, which are what could be done by the engineers to prevent this disaster, and what could be done by the managers to prevent this disaster. First, let's look at the first part, what could have been done by the engineers. Firstly, I think that if the engineers were to communicate effectively with their managers, this incident could have been prevented. The engineers know that there was a serious problem with the O-ring before the launch of the Challenger. the engineers at that time, Boyce Jolly sent multiple memos to his manager to describe about the problems, but apparently he was ignored. Now, let's look at the memo that was sent by Boyce Jolly. As we can see, this memo is quite wordy. It contains technical jargons and it is unconvincing because at that time, Tyco management actually wanted him to prove that the O-ring will fail during the launching. So in my opinion, the engineers could actually present the effect of cold temperature versus the degree of damage of the O-ring. The launch temperature of Challenger on that day was so cold that with the coldest launch ever, with the worst damage ever seen to date, that even a casual observer could have determined that the risk of the disaster was severe. By doing so, I believe the engineer could have increased their chance of persuading their managers to cancel the launch of the Challenger on that day. Next, I also think that the engineer could deploy whistleblowing method to prevent this disaster. Now, what is whistleblowing? Whistleblowing is actually an act of exposing information or activity that is deemed illegal or unethical within a private or public organization. The engineers can choose to bring the information to surface either by internally or externally by media or government so as to gain the attention of the public. By doing so, I believe the engineers could have pressurized the management to think twice about their decision making. So, although the consequences of whistleblowing may be severe, as the engineers may be losing their job by doing so, I believe it is a truly ethical decision, especially when people's lives are at stake. Next, I will move on to my second part of this presentation, in which I will be talking about what could have been done by the managers to prevent this disaster. Firstly, the managers could have improved their decision-making process. As we all know, on the night before of the launching of the Challenger, there was a meeting to discuss about any major issues that would lead to the delay of the launch. So during the meeting, however, there was no any members of the Safety Council, and the managers decided to go ahead with the ill-fated launch. At some point of time, as stated by Andrew, the managers even tell the engineers to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. Next, the second thing that the managers can do to prevent this disaster is to reduce the red tape level in the organization. A heavily layered, procedure-based, procedure-oriented bureaucratic structure inhibited necessary communication and action between the engineers and the managers. So before that, all the problems were identified as a potential risk by the engineers, but they find it very difficult to convey this information to their managers who are responsible for the launch. So I think that should the conflict between them be managed properly and the information be delivered effectively, this disaster could have been avoided. Next, I will pass on to Wei Kang to talk about the conclusion of this case study.
Thank you, Renshen. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Wei Kang. I will quickly summarize what has been covered so far. We started our presentation with a short video about the space shuttle explosion. Then we talked about the objectives of the space shuttle. Next, we discussed the scenario before the launch of the space shuttle. After that, we analyzed the conflict between NASA and Molten Tyco. Finally, we proposed some solutions that could be done in order to prevent this disaster. Now, I will be talking about what can we learn from this case study and how does it benefit us in our future career. In order to manage workplace conflict well, the first thing that we can learn from this case is how to choose the right mode of responses. Inappropriate use of mode of responses will result in poor conflict management, which may eventually lead to a very undesirable event. For example, in our case study, NASA employed the mode of computing, which eventually leads to the shocking news of space shuttle explosion. In order to prevent wrong mode of responses used, we need to understand the benefits and the drawbacks for each mode, then analyze our situation and find the balance between the benefit and the cost of the decision that we are making. Secondly,
effective communication is very important when managing workplace conflict. Simple, clear, and concise communication of information will help to ease the severity of the conflict. This can be clearly seen in our case study. Due to the weak persuasive power of molten thiopol, the management team of NASA is not well persuaded about the severity of the launch. As a result, they let emotion drive decision ordering the launch after the meeting. Things could have been better if information is delivered in a more direct and simpler manner. Now, I will show an example about simplicity and conciseness that I have been emphasizing. In this scenario, this little boy asked this little girl, "Why is the door open?" And this is how she responded to the question. And this is the alternative way of answering this question. Can you see the difference? Isn't that the second answer is more direct, simpler, and easier to understand? This is the reason why being concise and simple is very important for effective communication. Next, these two conflict management skills are very beneficial to all of us, as workplace conflict is inevitable and we must learn to resolve it. By having these skills, we are able to create a harmonious working environment, resolve the existing problems in our company, and improve the efficiency of the whole team. Lastly, we hope that our presentation has given you an in-depth understanding about the conflict of this case and some workplace conflict management skills. I shall end my presentation with this quote, which is worth to be learned by all of us. Don't fear conflict, embrace it. It's your job. Thank you.
We were talking about groupthink just now.
Yes.
Were you referring to the NASA team or the?
Actually, I'm referring to the telco, molten telco engineers.
Right. So they had groupthink, they had this issue.
Yeah, because the pressure from higher authority, as in like mentioned by Andrew earlier, the chief engineers were asked to put down his engineering hat instead of put down his engineering hat and put on his management hat. So it's like the chief engineer have to decide the decision, and all the engineers have to follow his decision. So and then in order to make to seek for the desire of harmony, they have to do so.
And to top off this one, the management as well also have the groupthink issue, because there are so many managers that when the government pressurize him, all the managers, they also have a similar issue, and it's like multi-layered issues of groupthink.
Just now, the footage that you showed at the beginning of your video, at the beginning of your presentation, was that a real footage or
Yeah.
was it?
That's live footage.
Oh, really? Yeah, that was exactly what. Those are the engineers, I suppose.
Yeah.
So that was their actual reaction when the Challenger just abruptly exploded.
But we actually have one more is
Like,
all the audience.
Oh,
all
you
the
mean
all
just
the
now
projects.
the
and
actually
there were
those
some people
audience
looking at the screen.
oh those are the control center.
Yeah, they are looking
Yes.
through the screen, but actually, in fact, on that place itself, the family is there watching their family exploded. But we didn't show that because it looks too bad.
Sorry. So when did Morton Typo call up NASA and ask them, tell them to stop or tell them the issue? Because if I'm not wrong, you guys said like one night before, was that right?
Because usually before the launch, they will have a final meeting to decide whether go or no go.
Right.
So the night before, because before that, usually his employers turned him down a lot of times. So he
Right.
took that final opportunity to try to present his data and everything.
Right.
but they couldn't simulate the exact situation as the temperatures on the launch day. So that's why their data weren't so convincing, but they were very sure that it will definitely fail because from previous launches, even though the temperatures weren't that cold, but they were already experiencing erosion. So that's why I mentioned earlier that 6 months before the launch, he actually warned his own management also. But they think that's just a small issue because the shuttle previously launched properly.
Okay.
Yeah, but they know that with that temperature, it was really very low. It would definitely fail.
And
But, yeah.
they failed to take account of that despite knowing that, I mean, the next day the temperature is going to be so low. I mean, they probably have a problem.
Because NASA managers, right, they were very desperate to launch. So usually they will ask them to show that it is not safe to launch. But at that point, they were so pressured that they say, prove that it will definitely fail. So they couldn't do that. Because at that time, it was 1970s, their data and all weren't accurate enough to show that at that temperature, because it was really very low compared to the previous launches. So it was like a new situation for them.
But
And
in fact, as he said, there's no data, but also mentioned by Renshen, the weather was so cold that even normal people know that it is it confirmed there will be accident happening. But on the day of launching, before the launch itself, the managers are so desperate that they actually opt out all the engineers from voting for the launch, and then they just make the decision by themselves. So they cheat on the teleconference voting.
Actually, before that, there was quite some of the delay already from January, which I think that actually made the managers feeling quite desperate for the launching.
Sorry, which month was this again?
It was in January.
January.
But before that, there was a lot.
There have been disagreeing on for the launch for a long time already. And the night before that, it is the time when management team overrides the decision of engineer.
Because if they keep delaying, they will lose the trust of the government. And at that time, NASA was a private organization, so they need the funds.
So the memo kept getting, as in he kept sending memos, but it was only like the night before that the management actually, sorry, the engineering guys actually brought the issue up.
Oh, no, it's many years ago. They already know that there's this problem. They keep telling about this, and the management keep ignoring, keep trying to run away from the issue until 6 months before. They intensify the issue. The Roger Boyce-Lee guy, he go and intensify the issue, and managers actually did something. He set up a commission or a team to check out on this issue, but in fact the team is non-existent. So it's like, again, to avoid what Roger Boyce-Lee is trying to say. And it's really concerned by engineers long ago.
The team hasn't, so he didn't make a team to check what the
They
substantial.
made it, but it's not existent.
It's not very resourceful. Actually, Roger sent multiple memos to his managers,
Right.
but his manager just don't see that how serious is the problem. Because what he did is he wanted him to prove that it will fail, but not just words.
It's like desperation blinded him.
Yeah.
So was there a lawsuit after the disaster?
Yes, all of them are dead.
So all of them are
Lawsuit.
But was there a lawsuit
Yes.
against
Each,
NASA? I
yes.
suppose?
Each of the astronauts' family sued the NASA and wanted $1 billion for each astronaut's loss.
In fact, this wasn't the first time it happens to NASA. And many years after that, Space Shuttle Columbia, you can go and Google, there was another
Maybe prior
accident.
to Challenger, there wasn't there another disaster?
Apollo 13.
Yeah, Apollo 13,
Oh.
right? Yeah, before Challenger.
But
Was
the
it a
Apollo
disaster
13
as well?
Yeah.
But the main focus here they were emphasizing was because other shuttle launch, the launch process, because to the engineers, right, as long as they pass that launch process, because during launch they will use up the solid rocket boosters, and then up to a certain stage when the fuel is completely burned off, and then it will drop off. They will disconnect. So you will not be an issue once you reach to a certain level. So their main concern is as long as you cross that certain boundary, and the fuel gets used up and it gets dropped off, it won't be a concern. But the problem is the temperature was too low and it will fail during the launch stage. Yeah. So if something happens to the solid rocket boosters at that point, then they will be.
So this means that Challenger, that's the first time Challenger was launched, right?
No, it's many times already.
Many times.
Oh, it
They
was not
reuse,
just-
they reuse the
I thought
shuttle.
when you talked about the successful launches, there was some other
No.
space shuttle.
Because they promised the government they will make it routine and affordable. So to make it affordable, they reuse the space shuttle
In
after
fact,
they land.
this Challenger is a prototype and it's not meant to be launched. But when it's successful launch for the first time, they say, why not we just use this as our main shuttle? Then they just keep using despite many problems arises.
If I'm not mistaken, I think there are around 17 successful launches, which I think that's why they make that complacent. Yeah.
I think as engineers, this is a real issue, right? Sometimes you know that there's a technical problem and the product should not be launched, or you should inform your customer, but because of the company's reputation or because of profits or tight deadline, you might end up having to go ahead and launch it anyway, right? And in the end, there could be some negative repercussions. So in your opinion, as a fresh graduate, what do you think would be a good solution if you find that you're supposed to work on a machine and there's some issues and you need to let your boss know, but he thinks that you should just go ahead and sell it to the customer nonetheless, try and cover it up. I think that's happens quite often, isn't it? Right? That's why you have all these defects and accidents.
In my opinion, whether to sell the machine or the system, I think it is better to consult people who are more experienced in this before making any decision.
Like who?
Colleagues.
Does I'm sure in your engineering course you probably would have read some ethics.
Yeah.
So what does the ethics
For us,
course
I think there are two stages for this. At first, if we know about this problem, we should go and try and stop it or make some amendment. But during the amendment itself is a challenge because if, like just now mentions the notes, if it's too wordy, too many jargons, too hard to understand, then it's not convincing enough. So what we need to do is to be concise and just say, no, this cannot work, so please stop it. If this also cannot work, the next step would be to blow the whistle. At first internally and then externally. Yeah. Because no matter how much the company will suffer from the financial issue.
Internally means you probably have to bypass your supervisor.
Yes. In our ethics, engineering ethics, it actually suggested, not suggest, it's a must for us to hold paramount of safety no matter what happened. So
you
if
have to take oath for that.
yeah, we have a code. Yeah.
There's a
Just like
code of
Hippocrates
conduct.
oath.
So medicine.
Yeah, medicine.
Medicine.
So you also have an engineer's code of ethics.
Yes. But the problem is, I think nowadays, because people view their career very seriously, and because of the power distance and everything, so maybe this whistleblowing policy is not good enough to make people dare to step up. So I think this is an area that should be reviewed.
Maybe it also depends on the severity of the case. If you think that you're not going to cause a loss of life, maybe you just close one eye, right?
I think that the engineer should possess some kind of skills, like persuading skills and communication, so that they can settle the matter internally first. But in case it cannot be settled, I think they should keep to their ethic. Like as we know, Morton Tiger actually, what he did is that he actually quit the company and he actually was rewarded with some kind of award for his ethics. Yeah.
In fact, you mentioned that we should keep an eye closed, but that's actually not alright. So an example in our school is, or in all the construction sites, we have a safety office. If you can see, there's a small office. There's an independent organization. If anything were to happen, we can just refer to them for whistleblowing or all sorts of stuff.
Okay, I know who take the responsibility for the incident in the end. The managers or every time. All the managers. How about the engineers?
The engineers know because they actually, there's actually a commission efforts. They want to evaluate the commission. Never mind. commission asked every single one who is involved in this incident and asked about what happened. So all the engineers said that they had already warned their manager about this. So now we can see that the managers are the criminal, right? And then they ask manager about this stuff, then they try and blame others and blame other stuff, but in the end, they found out that it's the managers at fault. So managers are all punished. Yeah.
You know, sometimes what people do is they also take the case to the media, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your opinion on this?
That
For
should
example,
be-
the
that's
organization is very
an act of,
reputable.
whistleblowing.
Yeah.
That should be the last stage. After everyone just try to ignore you, then
So
you
you
go.
think it's okay?
It is. If it involves life, yeah. If
Yeah.
the thing is very serious, I think it is alright to do so.
As a last resort. I think by going through the media, which is considered the last step, I think the managers will definitely think very well about their decisions. Because if they make a wrong step, the whole world will know about them. Yeah. But the bad thing about it, I think it would affect the good names of the company. Yeah.
But anyway, when you take it to the media, there are many platforms that you can go to, right? So for example, as an individual, you can just post it on Facebook. That's the most effective, and then it circulates everywhere. Or you can just take it to MediaCorp, right?